get it for you. But you kill her, you do this, if you get nothing. Are you listening to me? The only way you're gonna get what you want is for you to... You think I'm playing? You think I'm playing? You don't think I'll do it? Where is it? Where the hell is it? Look at me. Where the hell is it? Look at me, stay with me. Seven!
There are a lot of things I can say to explain why J.J. Abrams' Mission Impossible 3 is probably my favorite action movie ever, and definitely the best in the Mission Impossible series. Now, you can talk all you want about incredible acting performances, amazing camera work, the amazing and authentic visual effects being this perfect blend of practical and digital, the list goes on. But there's one rather large element to this movie that I think is executed especially well. Something that I wish movies in general, but especially action movies, would do. And that's crafting a perfect exposition. Mission Impossible 3 has probably the best exposition to any action movie I have personally ever seen. The exposition, or put simply, the beginning of any movie is extremely important for crafting a good story. It's where and how you hook the audience, establish conflict, introduce characters, and explain the situation the characters are in. It's how you spark interest and passion in the audience as quickly and effectively as possible. Mission Impossible 3 is a modest 2 hours and 9 minutes long, which just goes to show you don't need to make action movies 3 hours in order for them to be good. But for this video, I'm going to be focusing on just the first 30 minutes of the film, which I think is near perfect when it comes to establishing a story. And here are what I think are the headlining qualities of this movie's great exposition: gravity, motivation, and accessibility. And of course there are a handful of other reasons, but these are the big general ones I'd like to really focus on for this video. Let's start off with the first one: gravity.
No.
Time.
The opening scene to Mission Impossible 3 is probably the most exhilarating in the whole film. This count to 10 interrogation scene between Ethan Hunt and the villain Owen Davian is absolutely perfect when it comes to hooking the audience on the movie. Of course, it shows why Philip Seymour Hoffman played an absolutely terrifying villain, and also displays a pretty underrated acting performance on Cruise's part. But the main thing that this scene does so well to hook the audience is that it establishes this feeling of gravity. It immediately gives the film this incredible weight that the audience so desperately wants to get off their chest. The opening scene is like an attack on the viewer in a good way. It's this wave of acceleration and fear being thrown at us in a way that gets us immediately invested. There are a few factors to why this scene and this movie in general has this feeling of gravity. And I think the biggest reason is that our protagonist is not in control. It's a rare moment in the series that we see Ethan Hunt is truly helpless and underpowered. So Ethan Hunt, along with the audience that experiences the movie through Hunt's perspective, is dominated by this uncontrollable force. We realize right at the very beginning that this movie is going to be different from the others. We see immediately that our protagonist is not in control of the outcome, and thus the audience is unable to predict how the movie will go. But right off the bat, in just one scene, the audience is overcome by this feeling of dread, this unease, that they are now desperately longing for a resolution because of. That is how you do a hook. The film goes on to explain that Ethan has spent the last few years in a lower profile role in the IMF, working as a trainer. While back home, he's about to get married to the girl of his dreams, where shortly after a party celebrating their plans, he somewhat foolishly accepts a new mission to rescue one of his former students who he cares about deeply. We are then delighted with this incredible early action sequence where he rescues the girl, they escape in the most badass way possible, and then it all comes crashing down when she tragically dies in the helicopter ride to freedom due to an explosive implanted in her head. This is yet another great piece of exposition because it conveys yet again The threat that our protagonist is facing, that in turn the audience is facing, is greater than could be predicted. This death of a character who Hunt deeply cares for is executed in this intentionally anticlimactic way to show the audience this movie is not holding back. This is how quickly and suddenly an important character that you like can just die, which yet again instills this feeling of unease. We can't predict where this movie is going. We can't conceive of what this movie is capable of. This sequence of events adds more and more weight to the plot. This sort of backhanded, harsh treatment by the director to the audience, if you will, is exactly what separates this movie from the rest. These opening scenes are just as much of a wake-up call to the audience as it is to the characters. The movie comes at us hard and is absolutely relentless when it comes to immediately establishing a threat, which is just a lost art when it comes to modern movies. We need more movies that cross a line with the viewer, like this one does. That's Gravity. It's important for any exposition to establish motivation, to clearly lay out the reasons why the characters are driven to move the plot along, and in turn why the audience should feel motivated as well. This movie does this exceptionally well, in my opinion, because of three major reasons. Ethan Hunt has 1. Something to prove, 2. Someone to avenge, and 3. Someone to protect. For number 1, let's see how MI3 twists an otherwise boring formula on its head. When it's revealed to the IMF that the mission is a catastrophic failure, what follows is this scene where Hunt and his operations specialist, John Musgrave, are sternly lectured to and reprimanded by the head of the force, Theodore Brassel. This scene, which displays Brassel's disapproval, disappointment, and resentment, establishes that Ethan Hunt, in this movie more than others, has something to prove. Rather than your typical approach, your mission, take down Owen Davian, we know you can do it. The movie instead insists on, no, stop what you're doing. This villain is greater than you, and we don't trust you can handle it. Which I think we can all agree is a much more captivating and exhilarating approach that launches us and the characters into the rising action of the film. Our main character not being respected or trusted by his own people, among many other burdens, is a great way to give that character drive and motivation in a film, and to further captivate the viewer. Later in the film, we get a hunch that Brassel is actually working with the villain, but instead it proves to be Musgrave who's the real double-crosser. But regardless, the audience doesn't know any of that at this point in the movie, so the impact of this scene for the first-time watcher still holds firm. There is one line in this scene I think perfectly sums up the motivation and the gravity in this film, and it's this.
Your operation has achieved one thing. You have reminded Davian that he is winning.
And with that line, we are just barely over 30 minutes in the movie. Secondly, for motivation, Ethan Hunt has someone to avenge. His student Lindsay Ferris, who died right in front of him in the failed rescue mission. This is something the audience can really get behind as motivation because we too saw her die, and in real time, rather than in the form of some quick backstory or intro sequence where the purpose and motivation for the characters is just explained to us like a storybook. While a lot of times those kinds of expositions are stylistic choices, they fail to achieve this level of real-time, tangible motivation that the audience can clasp onto simultaneously with the protagonist. In other words, the motivation is shown, not told. Yet another thing this movie did so well to establish in just the first 30 minutes is the relationship between Ethan Hunt and his new wife. Admittedly, this part of the exposition could not have been accomplished so well if it weren't for the visible chemistry between these actors, but I digress. It makes sense for action movies to have a love interest. It's a common movie trope we've all gotten used to at this point. But the way Mission Impossible 3 steps it up a notch from, say, Mission Impossible 2 is that it establishes a relationship using a realistic, approachable, and relatable formula. In Mission Impossible 3, Ethan takes off time from the Force to live a low-profile life and start a family with the woman he loves. In Mission Impossible 2, it's this obnoxious, hot, sexy boy falls in love with hot, sexy girl approach that's unrealistic and unrelatable, making it difficult for the audience to really feel attached to it. Mission Impossible 3 is modest, while Mission Impossible 2 is extravagant. Which one do audience find themselves attached to? To put it simply, no one cares if your sexy girlfriend is in danger. They care if your loving wife is. Jokes aside, this movie establishes that Hunt has someone to protect, that both he and the audience care about. This is how you establish a love interest for motivational purposes. So, we've explained why Mission Impossible 3's exposition has a gravitational force and a list of motivations, and we now arrive at the last main reason for why this exposition is so good, and that's accessibility. A huge reason why Mission Impossible 3 has such a great exposition is that it's accessible. In other words, it's clear, it's understandable, it's comprehensible, it's simple yet effective. And this is largely because the plot of the film is contained. It's focused on one central goal, where the plot takes us from point A to point B. Sure, there are a few twists and bumps along the way to make it exciting, but the goal is stated clearly in the exposition and accomplished in the resolution. This is something that I wish more action movies nowadays would do. Plots that are easy to understand and follow along, with expositions that lay out the goal clearly. Mission Impossible 3's plot is contained to one perspective, one goal, and one timeline. So many action movies these days are trying to do way too much. Like, for example, Marvel movies are becoming overwhelming and confusing due to just how many characters and plot points and time frames and universes they're trying to connect in just one movie, which not only leads to viewers becoming detached, but it gives way to tons of plot holes and continuity errors everywhere. Or another example, the movie Tenet. While I do really love Christopher Nolan and his long, big, epic movies with thick storylines, Tenet is one of his few movies that just fails at instilling satisfaction in the viewer. It's just so endlessly and overwhelmingly confusing and inaccessible that it's no longer even fun to watch. I've seen this movie multiple times all the way through. I still don't know what happened. We've gotten to a point where movies are prioritizing complexity and ambiguity over simple and accessible plots. Mission Impossible 3 is a perfect example that you don't need to have multiple universes and perspectives collide in a huge, extravagant fashion to make a good action movie. It proves that when you focus on the core elements that attach an audience to a story, you can keep the rest of it simple, and somehow it's still more entertaining. I wish more action movies did it like MI3. Like I said at the beginning, the exposition is not the only reason why I love this movie. Of course I love all the stunts and the gadgets and the explosions and the hand-to-hand combat. It's one of my favorite action movies ever. Of course I have to appreciate those things. But the reason why all those things are able to thrive and entertain the viewer is the fact that Mission Impossible 3 prioritized setting it all up. It's because of the exposition that the movie can have the freedom to do cool gadget and sport car and hot girl, and cool gadget exploding sport car with hot girl. But in all seriousness, the creators, writers, producers, and director all understood that nothing in this movie can be properly enjoyed without valid reasoning. You can't enjoy the villain without him seriously crossing a line. You can't feel motivated without establishing what there is to be motivated by. And you can't get behind a plot of a movie if you don't understand it. MI3 knew all of that and tackled each issue effectively, which is why I love this movie and why I think its exposition can teach us all a few lessons. Thanks for watching.